today we're going to help you work around the little white lies real estate agents tell. Plus, we're going to discuss a study that helps predict academic success in children and, I guess, their further success in life.
Are you interested in property investing, success or money? Well, you're in the right place. This is the Michael Yardney podcast, where each week you'll learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in 20 minutes or less. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the fourth time he's won a similar award in the last 6 years.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. Thank you for all the loyal listeners who are returning. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome. You can always binge on old episodes at michaelyardneypodcast.com or on iTunes or Stitcher, and subscribe at michaelyardneypodcast.com, or you can click the Property Update app and you can get your podcasts and my blogs on the go. You're going to get lots of information like the two great topics we're going to discuss today about unpacking the white lies that estate agents tell and about predicting your future success. So firstly, I'm going to have back as my guest George Raptis, Director of Metropole Properties in Sydney, who's a licensed estate agent. We're going to just discuss the concepts about estate agents. Are they honest, or do they bend the truth? Or are they just trying to do their job without being sued? Now, we know that estate agents have got a very bad reputation, but over the years I've dealt with many estate agents, and most are not money-hungry vultures looking out for their next victim. That's what the media would sometimes want you to perceive, wouldn't it? Most are just regular people doing a job, doing their very best in a very competitive industry. Oh, sure, there's always the occasional rogue real estate agent who quickly gets caught out, but many estate agents just bend the truth a little bit to encourage you to get more excited about a property, to be a bit worried about losing out. So in a moment, I'm going to have a chat with George Raptis about the little white lies estate agents tell and what you can do about them. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk to you about a study that I found really interesting because it came about with the question, can you really predict academic success or how well a child's going to graduate? And the study proved that you can, but it may not be how you think. Now, even if you don't have kids or are planning to have kids or your kids are grown up, this is still very relevant for you because psychologist Angela Duckworth studied people in various challenging situations and found out what predicts those who are most likely to succeed. And one characteristic emerged, and it wasn't social intelligence, and it wasn't good looks, and it wasn't physical health, and it wasn't IQ. If you listen to the second half of this podcast, I'll tell you what it is, because this is really important for you, not just if you're a student, but as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as somebody who wants to get ahead with life. But first, let's have a chat with George Raptis about the little white lies estate agents tell.
As a property strategist, I've dealt with my fair share of real estate agents over the years. And as a property investor personally, I've bought many properties for myself too. And I found most real estate agents follow a professional code of conduct. However, a few agents can and do adopt certain ways of saying things, doing things that some potential buyers would say maybe a little bit of white lies, but it gets deals across the line. So over the years, I've heard pretty much all of these. But today I'd like to get George Raptis, Director of Metropole Properties in Sydney, back to give us some thoughts from his many years of real estate about some of the little white lies estate agents will tell us and how to interpret them and how to level the playing field. So welcome, George.
Hi, Michael.
Now, I think first of all, we've got to give a disclaimer. You've been a real estate agent for many, many years, 20-something odd years in general real estate, in the last 10 years working to represent the buyers, and I'm a licensed estate agent, and both our teams incorporate a lot of real estate agents, and there's some really nice people in the field. But like in every industry, sometimes professional salespeople and negotiators just tell a little, and I'm calling them quietly, white lies to help get the deal across. So I guess I'm looking for your experience to maybe when agents come up with some words that try to engender emotion, try to engender fear, that our listeners can be aware of them and not get caught in the traps. So what sort of things would you be watching out for if an estate agent says them to you?
I guess one of the common little white lies some agents, and you're right, Michael, the industry's definitely cleaned itself up, but there are some little white lies still floating around out there. And I guess one common one is, we have another interested party. So what do they mean by that? They're essentially implying another buyer's waiting in the queue to pounce on the property if you take too long to make your move, thereby playing on your fear of losing out to the competition. So what does this do? It creates a sense of urgency and can be a very effective psychological play in tipping a hesitant purchaser across the line. So while you shouldn't necessarily dismiss the possibility that someone else is nipping at your heels, never feel pressured into a purchase because you might not be the victor in what's possibly a fictitious battle. So a good way to determine if the agent's story is legitimate is to ask questions. For example, has a contract been signed? Has it been presented to the vendor? Remember that in real estate, there's always another deal to be done, so don't be afraid to walk away. So be wary of the "we have another interested party" line.
Well, they will have other interested parties, George, because they're not lying. And I think that's why you're calling it a white lie, because people have come across, they've come to an open for inspection, they've exhibited an interest. So I think what you said is a really good question. Have they actually signed a contract? Because when we had our chat a while ago about negotiation, what you pointed out was the concept that unless you put it in writing, it's really not a proper offer.
No.
So if people said, "Oh, look, I'm interested," that's very different if they've signed. So that's a great comeback when we have an interested party. You ask them, well, have they signed a contract? Oh, well, you get back to me when they have. I'm doing my homework. I'm doing my due diligence. I will offer you a fair market price when I've completed my investigation. I think that's a good way back. Okay, what if they go further and they say much the same thing? We've had an offer.
Yeah, it's pretty similar to the previous tactic in that it can persuade a reluctant buyer to make an actual offer. But how do you know if you're being played? Once again, asking if the other offer is in the form of a signed contract. Sale can indicate whether any genuine bid has in fact been put forward. If the answer is no, then you're competing with a verbal proposal at best, or a little bit of a little white lie, like we said. So don't get backed into a corner. Many a time, somebody would speak to an agent and they'd be speaking over the phone and the agent would tell them that they've got an offer. Do they really? We don't know that. But as long as we qualify what sort of offer that is, if it's verbal, like an agent, like you said, Michael, it's not really worth anything. If it's in the form of a signed contract and as in the form of a cheque, as we discussed earlier, you know the people in front of you are serious.
Sure, and that gives you an opportunity to have a counteroffer. Of course, you're going to ask the agent, well, at what price was the offer? And they're not obliged to tell you. In fact, they'd be wrong to tell you that. But it does create a level of urgency. Okay, George, we're talking about some of the white lies that estate agents would tell you. What's some of the others you've heard?
Some of the others, we don't need to include that as a special clause. The vendors will be fine with that. So if something's important on your agenda, having the agent just saying that'll be fine is not good enough. So while it's nice to think any special requests will be honoured on the basis of a verbal say-so, there's no guarantees without a signed, agreed and executed contract. Remember, he told me so is not a legitimate legal argument. Neglecting to
that wouldn't work very well in court, would it, George?
No. So you need to incorporate any and all requests into a legally binding written agreement. If you take the say-so of the agent, you're just setting yourself up for a fall. So make sure once you get a contract, you get it looked at by your solicitor or conveyancer, express to them what are the amendments that you'd like, whether it be deposit, settlement terms, etc., and they should be attached to the contract.
George, what about when the estate agent pushes you and says something along the lines of, well, okay, thanks for the offer, the vendor wants you to put it in writing, it's got to be signed up tonight?
Yep, the old time pressure situation, really. I think that if a vendor has more than one eager buyer, Michael, throwing offers their way, they'd be happy to wait for a while, don't you think, and see how the competition plays out? So if an agent is applying deadlines to negotiations in this manner, you can almost guarantee they either have a personal commitment they want to get to, it might be a game of golf or whatever, or the vendor
they want it over by the weekend, do they?
Well, I know, and I know of a lot of agents, especially the senior agents. If they can sell something during the week and they don't have to go to the open for inspection on the Saturday, they'd be very happy to do so. So if you require more time to do your due diligence or arrange the various inspections, pest and building and so forth, it could be strata reports if you're looking at an apartment, don't be afraid to put an offer in writing with a conditional clause making this requirement clear.
Right. Okay. Now, I'm asking the agent, what do you think the property is worth? Now, today there has to be more and more disclosure, and it varies from state to state, so they'll often give you a range. But one of the questions I often ask is, okay, how did you come to that figure? And the other one I ask is, well, what does the owner want? What does the vendor expect? An agent sometimes says something like, oh, they haven't given me an indication. How would you answer that? How would you respond?
Yeah. Look, these days, any agent worth the commission they're paid knows what their client wants. Whether they've stated it outright in the sales authority form and justified that in the form of comparable sales, which they need to do in New South Wales now, or in subtle undertones during an informal chat. If you're getting stonewalled on this point, perhaps changing your approach slightly and question what type of limit you should set yourself on auction day, given the level of interest in the property. That way, the agent's compelled to give you some type of figure instead of, dismissing your query with a little white lie.
Now, George, at the moment, the markets are slowing down a bit. The frenzy has gone out. Auction clearance rates have dropped a bit. And I know at Metropole we love buying properties at the right price prior to auction. But sometimes the agent will use that as a bit of a play to find out what you're going on. So I'd be wary if an agent tells me, look, we're happy to present any offer prior to the auction when he's sort of partway through the campaign. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it always rings alarm bells with me, Michael, and this strategy can say a lot about the circumstances surrounding the actual property, including the vendor who may have a specific time frame in which to offload their home for some reason. But more often than not, agents will entice you into making a pre-auction or offer or offers to test buyer interest. So thereby, what they're doing is they're gaining a better insight into how much the market might pay and preparing the vendor to set their target reserve accordingly. More, I don't know whether ruthless is a good word, or experienced agents can use this information against unsuspecting emotional buyers in particular. If you make an overly generous offer, for instance, they might use this to set a higher reserve, knowing the desperate bidder will compete to meet it and either pay more than they should at the fall of the hammer or later during post-auction negotiations. So be careful of when the agent tells you that they're going to present any offers prior to auction day, because it might work against you.
Well, we recognise that at Metropole as we help our clients buy their investment properties in their homes, but we've actually got a little bit extra up our sleeve because we love buying them before auction and not against the competition, and frequently get them at a better price than we believe would happen at auction. But if the agent is playing this game and does try to use that information at auction, what we'll often do is send a different buyer's agent to the auction. So we say, okay, fine, you didn't accept my offer, we're out. And then one of the other team will go along to represent the purchaser, and the agent doesn't recognise really that it's the same potential buyer. We haven't really played our cards. Much harder for an individual purchaser to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in New South Wales, they need to register the bid. So the person that's actually, intending on purchasing the property has to bid themselves. They can't, unless they use the services of professional buyers agents such as ourselves, who they will authorise us to bid on their behalf. So you're right, Michael, great tactic.
Sure. Now, one last one. Oh, look, that's okay. You really don't need a solicitor to look over the contract. There's a cooling off period here. Now, in Victoria, we have what's called a vendor statement, so there's a lot more due diligence there. What would you say to an agent telling you that?
I'd say, no, that's not going to happen. So how does a real estate agent know whether the contract for sale is accurate for a start? They're real estate agents, they're not solicitors. So in that particular case, buyer beware definitely applies to the significant financial commitment you make when purchasing a property investment. It's essential, paramount, that you have any contract okayed by your solicitor or conveyancer before it becomes unconditional and you're locked in.
Well, there you go, George. There's a whole lot of little white lies that estate agents tell that we've all come across. But if you're aware of them, if you're looking out and listening, and that means not getting too emotionally involved, then you can protect yourself, because ultimately the best way is to understand this, arm yourself with good market information, know what the property's worth, understand a bit about the legalities of contracts. And if you're in doubt, just consider using a buyer's agent to help translate this agent speak, because basically they are agents, but working for you, not for the vendor. So while it may cost a little bit more at the point of purchase, it could really save you a lot in the long run. Thanks for your time, George, and for that great insight.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Well, that was a fun chat. The second half of our show is going to be very different, where I'm going to discuss how one can predict not only academic success, but success in all areas of your life. And when you find out what it is, it's probably going to be very, very different to the factor that you first thought about. So we'll be back in just a moment to discuss how you can predict success.
If you're looking to get started in property or to grow your existing portfolio, turn to someone you can trust for independent advice. The team at Metropole Property Strategists have been involved in over $2 billion worth of property transactions, creating wealth for their clients, and they can do the same for you. They don't sell property, so their advice is independent and unbiased. Metropole can devise a strategy, their buyer's agents will buy your property for you, or you could use their renovations team, property development or portfolio management services. Arrange a time for an obligation-free chat at metropole.com.au. Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's Mindset Moment, we're going to have a chat about why some people are more successful than others. It's one of the themes of my Mindset Moment, the success habits of the rich. Whether you're entrepreneurs, business people, property investors, doesn't matter, because the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And it even starts earlier on in life. It starts in school. I was actually interested to read a study by Angela Lee Duckworth, who was a teacher who then became a psychologist. And she looked into the question of what separates those students who get straight A's from those who struggle in class. And interestingly, it's not necessarily a high IQ that pushes students to excel in their classes, is what she found. In fact, she found it wasn't the only difference between her best and her worst students. What she found was that some of those students with higher IQs occasionally performed worse than those with lower IQs. Now, that was a bit unusual. So she went back to look at what was it that gave straight A students the ability to do that while others struggled to pass. And she found there was one separating factor. She defined it as grit. What's grit? The passion and perseverance for long-term goals. But that's interesting. There's a theme amongst these regular mindset moments that I share with you each week. It fits in with what we've said before. The concept that you've got to learn delayed gratification. The concept that you've got to have a long-term perspective. The concept that you've got to get up one more time. You're going to fail. Things are going to go wrong. You've got to be one of those who tries again, who pushes outside your comfort zone. The concept that success comes from failure. I think you've got to recognise that everything that is easy today was once hard. Contrary to popular belief, grit has a more significant correlation to high school graduation classes than things like family income or social status. So now you know you don't need to be inherently intelligent to succeed in life. How do you form what Angela Duckworth calls grit? Look, unfortunately, there's no easy answer, and science hasn't done enough studies on how to actually build grit. But on the bright side, you don't need to be particularly talented, so maybe that's going to work for you. Angela's observed that there were cases of people who were highly talented who interestingly didn't have much grit. In other words, the more talent you possess, frequently the less grit you possess. Additionally, Angela offered some hope from a study called Growth Mindset, developed at Stanford University. She said that there was a concept of a growth mindset, which is the belief that the ability to learn isn't fixed and it can change with your efforts. So the bottom line is this means if you fail to show grit in the past, it doesn't mean you can't do it in the future. You can develop grit. For you to succeed in life, you're going to have to get up one more time. You're going to have to push past your boundaries. You're going to have to be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. You're going to have a long-term perspective, learn to delay gratification in the short term so you can enjoy the life you want in the long term. Thanks for spending the last 20 minutes with me. I hope you got some benefit from this week's show. And if you want to listen again, go back to iTunes or the Michael Yardney podcast, or why not download the Property Update app from my website, propertyupdate.com.au, and you can get my regular blogs and the podcast anywhere, anytime on your smartphone, whatever style smartphone you've got. And thanks for everybody who's been leaving the reviews on iTunes. That helps us grow, and I'd really appreciate if you did take a minute to go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review, michaelyardneypodcast.com/review, and leave a positive review. That just helps spread the message, and I'm always going to read them out. And this week I'd like to read out two that came over the last little while. One from GHM in Melbourne, who said, as expected, the content's brilliant and delivered in a format that's not only easy to comprehend, but convenient to listening to during my daily commute. Liking the mindset message also. Thanks, Michael. Well, thanks for that message. That's great. And there's another one from WPF. No one's leaving their real name, but that's okay, because they've said, having been a reader and subscriber for a while now, I think Michael's worked really hard at this format, and it shows valuable and well-presented information. Translation from the written articles or even the vlog to the podcast can be somewhat challenging, but he's absolutely nailed it. Gee, I couldn't have said that better myself, but thank you, WPF, for saying that. I really appreciate the great reviews everyone's leaving, and it's helping us rank so highly on iTunes. But most importantly, I'm really happy that you guys are enjoying my show, so I look forward to sending you another one in a week's time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property advice. If you got value from listening to this podcast, please leave us a review and we'll read it out on a future show. Just go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review and it will take you over to iTunes, where you can enter a review and let us know what you think. We'd really appreciate it. If you don't already subscribe on iTunes or on your Android phone, you'll find us there as Michael Yardney Podcast. If you'd like to gain instant access to the show notes or a transcript of the show, head across to michaelyardneypodcast.com. Watch out for our show next week. You'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 20 minutes.